He's currently at Northwestern, where he's leading a, well, he, as far as I can tell, he has an appointment in every department at Northwestern except Russian literature and computer science, but he covers everything else. But some of you may have noticed that he was a co-author actually on one of the IMWIT distinguished papers, worked with collaborator Nabil Al-Sharafa, and also worked with other Northwestern folks who've been presenting at this conference. So he's not really that much of an outsider, and we'd really like to draw someone like John into our community. I asked him to speak because he has particular experience and expertise in the development of on-body wearable sensing technologies, and a very interesting project thinking about how you can use this to track the progression of disease, specifically COVID. So John, take it away.
Great, thanks a lot, Greg, for the invite and the interesting introduction. Still boning up on my Russian literature, so we'll get there eventually. But yeah, it's great to be here and have a chance to participate in this interesting panel event. As Greg mentioned, I'm a hardware guy. I build stuff, and in particular, we're interested in engineering efforts that involve the interface between engineering and medicine. And I'm part of an institute here at Northwestern. It's an endowed institute, the QUERREY Institute for Bioelectronics, and our goal is to develop very high quality classes of electronics and biosensors that can intimately and chronically integrate with the human body at various vital organ systems. We do things in the area of brain interfaces, cardiac, kidney, bladder, peripheral nervous system, spinal cord. I'm going to focus on skin, and in particular skin-like devices that can mount on the skin almost like a temporary tattoo or a Band-Aid to establish a physical interface to the body, where the skin is acting as a window for clinical grade measurements of physiological properties and therefore health status. And so my core expertise is material science and engineering, electrical engineering, and biomedical engineering, and that's sort of the nature of our work. I'll focus on the skin interface devices and their relevance in managing the pandemic. And you might think, well, this is going to be another talk on a wearable technology, and in some ways it is, but in some ways it's not. I mean, it's a radically different type of wearable than maybe you're more familiar with. I mean, if you take a look at the wearable consumer industry, there's an incredible diversity of devices, probably hundreds of different models. But then when you take a second look, you realize it's not really that diverse from an engineering standpoint. It's basically rigid blocks of electronics loosely coupled to the wrist. That's about it. There are a couple of devices that exist in the form of rings that go on your fingers, and they can provide a lot of interesting functionality. But the lack of a persistent, intimate skin interface really limits the kinds of measurements that you can make reliably and continuously. So you can count steps, but there are very few physicians who can assign quantitative insights around step counting. You can do episodic measurements of ECG or SpO2, but it's not really a continuous measurement. And so you really kind of fall short, in terms of this engineering approach to clinical or medical grade types of wearables. And as a result, we've been interested in devices that really adapt physical forms that are much more similar to those of the soft tissue systems of the human body, in particular the skin. And so we published about a decade ago this concept of epidermal or skin-like electronics. So devices that laminate onto the surface of the skin, but adopt the physical properties of the epidermis. So it almost becomes an imperceptible type of physical interface to the body, but one that involves kind of that persistent skin interface that enables all sorts of clinical grade measurements to be performed continuously to yield data streams that physicians can look at and interpret and act upon in a practical manner. And so at this point, we have quite a broad portfolio of devices of that general type, some built in millimeter scale geometry, some in this kind of temporary tattoo type platform, capable of mounting at any location on the body, not just the wrist or the finger, but locations on the body that really matter in terms of the goal of the measurement. Devices that perform measurements continuously in a wireless fashion without tapes or straps or wires or other kinds of impediments that really sort of prevent continuous use and are compatible with natural daily activities. And breadth of biosensor functionality that can be dropped into those types of platforms is quite broad. All kinds of capabilities in thermal measurements, precision skin thermography, thermal transport measurements, electrical measurements, biopotentials, ECG, EMG, EEG, hydration. You can capture microliter volumes of sweat as it emerges from the surface of the skin. You can do biomarker analysis, biochemical composition of sweat and correlate that to blood. You can measure all sorts of things related to mechanical motions of the body, strain, modulus, pressure. Optical measurements are also possible, SpO2, PPG. You can map veins, you can do oximetry. You can even measure acoustic signatures of body processes, heart sounds, for example, respiratory sounds. And the consequence of this, I think maybe what's most relevant to this particular audience, is that these device platforms produce enormous amounts of high quality data. And it's complex multimodal data. And the question is, like, what do you do with all of that data? And how do you extract insights out of it that can be a benefit to patient care and healthcare more generally speaking? And so this is an area that we've been working on for, as I mentioned before, probably a dozen years or so. Around March or so, we were approached by a number of physicians that we've collaborated with over the years here at the Chicago Medical Complex. And this was the very early stages of the pandemic. And they became very interested in whether we could develop wearable devices that would be able to quantitate the key symptoms associated with COVID-19. And this is a paper that appeared in JAMA in April 17th of this year. And it really sort of quantitated the top 3 symptoms is fever, cough, and shortness of breath. And could you develop a wearable technology to track those 3 main symptoms? And if you think about an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring, you don't get any of this stuff. You don't get temperature, so you can't track fever. You're not at the right place in the anatomy to capture coughing events or respiratory activities such as shortness of breath. And so they were frustrated and were hoping that we could adapt one of our existing platforms or customize a device around these kinds of measurement targets. And it turns out that we had a system that was already deployed on patients. It was already pretty close to supporting those kinds of measurement modalities. In particular, it's a soft Band-Aid-like device that we designed to match on a special part of the anatomy known as the suprasternal notch. It's sort of the base of the neck, just above the point at which the collarbones meet. It's a soft tissue location that provides really a spectacular mounting location if you're interested in anything associated with respiratory activity. And COVID-19 is a respiratory disease. So this is where you want your device to be, right on the suprasternal notch. But you can't put a Fitbit, strap it on somebody's neck. You can't glue an Apple Watch to that position. It really comes down to this sort of soft mechanics and skin-like form factor to enable mounting on this very sensitive part of the body. But we can actually do that, and we were focused initially on deployment on stroke survivors, folks who are suffering from aphasia and or dysphagia. These are patients who have to relearn how to talk. They have to relearn how to swallow. And if you have a device with a high bandwidth triaxis accelerometer mounted on the suprasternal notch, you can capture vocal activity. You can capture swallowing events. You can measure when the swallows happen relative to the respiratory cycle. All sorts of information, very important for rehabilitation protocol designs for stroke survivors. And we had, at the time that we received the inquiry for COVID-specific devices, about 100 of these systems deployed on stroke survivors. And we realized right away that this is a great platform for really hitting those 3 main symptoms. We integrated a clinical grade temperature sensor isolated from ambient fluctuations in temperature. And we developed algorithms that allow us to take these data streams and make a determination of whether someone is suffering from shortness of breath and when and how often they're coughing. So it was a really kind of a perfect match. And it's really sort of the ability to mount on this part of the body that's absolutely critical. So at this location, you measure vibratory signatures associated with speech. You can get these swallowing events. You're close enough to the carotid artery. You can actually measure motion associated with pulsatile blood flow through those arteries. You capture respiration rate because you're coupled to the chest wall cavity, sounds, coughing, sleep dynamics, and so on. And so this is what the data looks like. This is time series data where all of these various events are in some cases overlapping in time, but they have distinct, unique identifying spectral features that allow you to separate out these activities, apply digital filtering techniques to these data streams for quantitation of how often these various signatures happen during the course of the day. And this is where sort of the data analytics and the machine learning really comes into play. So we've been able to deploy these on about 250 subjects. We have 30,000 hours of data, about 1 terabyte worth of data, 20 weeks of deployment, and continuous deployment up to the present time, with expanding plans into the fall. So the devices are fully automated. They just go on the body. They record locally to a memory module embedded in the device. When the device is removed from the body and placed on a charging pad, it immediately and automatically initiates a wireless data transfer process that moves the data from the device to an iPad and then up to the HIPAA-compliant cloud server. Once the device is fully charged, it's removed from the charging pad, it automatically starts up again, and it's placed back onto the suprasternal notch. So we've actually done a tremendous amount of measurement with this device technology, and it's really opening up sort of new kinds of biomarkers for tracking disease progression. So being able to count coughs on a daily basis allows one to determine, for instance, how a patient is responding to various therapies. Coughing and fever, early signs of symptoms can be picked up immediately, and you can also track patients in a home setting, so it's not confined to use in the clinic. And we've measured many patients throughout the course of the disease, from the day that they're admitted to the hospital to when they're released back into the home. And it's really about the patients. And this is an example of one patient who very nearly succumbed to the disease. She only has one lung and was very near admissions into the ICU here at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, just very narrowly avoided that. And we were able to track her progression throughout the various stages of the disease and back into the home. At the peak of the disease, she was coughing at a rate of about 150 to 200 coughs per hour. So really incredible level of symptomology associated with her particular response to the disease. And so I just come back and sort of emphasize this message, and I guess this associated opportunity. There are devices now that yield multimodal clinical grade data continuously applicable both in the clinic and in the home. The resulting data streams are tremendously rich, complex, and big. And the question is, how do you take all that data, apply machine learning, various data analytics to it, to extract as much information, actionable information as possible? I think there's a huge opportunity for this community in particular to engage in this area. I think it's a great future direction that folks should consider. And so with that, I'll go ahead and conclude and thank Greg again for inviting me to participate in this panel.